Good afternoon.
They used to be.
Welcome, everybody. We're glad you could join us today for this Lunch and Learn. My name is Brian Gutreiter. I'm the account manager for Indiana for Flat Earth Networking. And on behalf of our entire team, we really appreciate you guys taking your time out of your day to be with us for this Lunch and Learn, and hopefully take away some valuable things that you can apply then in your organizations. Briefly, I'm going to go through the agenda about what we're going to be doing today. First of all, for those who aren't familiar with Flat Earth, I'll give just a real brief introduction to who we are. And then I'll introduce our esteemed speaker who's taking his time to share his experience and expertise with us. Third, then there will be the presentation. And then fourth, we are going to have a Q&A session. So as you're listening today here, write down questions you have. If you're online, there is a Q&A that you can click on and type in your questions. And we'll make sure and get to all those questions at the end, okay? If you're not familiar with Flat Earth Networking, we're a cybersecurity consultancy here in Indianapolis and also based out of Nashville, Tennessee. What sets us apart is our commitment to really understand your business needs and then work with your technology team to fill in any gaps in your cybersecurity program. We greatly value education and continual learning, which is why we do things like this, building strong relationships so that we can all grow, as a cybersecurity community over time. So that's Flat Earth. Our speaker today is George Bailey. Now, George is the director of CyberTAP at Purdue, and I'll let him explain what CyberTAP is and what they do. George has extensive experience in IT and cybersecurity going back 25 years, has numerous industry certifications like CISSP, CCSP most recently, I believe, and many more. And then also is really engaged with the cybersecurity community in Indiana through InfraGard. And what's the state program, the Indiana State Executive that you're a part of?
So there's IACC, Indiana Executive Council for Cybersecurity.
Yes, Indiana Executive Council for Cybersecurity, yes.
And I sit on the SLCGP, which is the state local government cybersecurity program.
Yep.
So in order to get JIRA, FSMA funds, every state's getting infrastructure funds. Indiana's getting $22 million. I sit on the committee to figure out how we spend that money.
Fantastic, fantastic. So George is going to walk us through the importance of, or why all the hype, with cybersecurity policies. Now, that's a foundational concept, but it's one that's easily overlooked. And even if we have cybersecurity policies in place, it's easy to forget that they're there and not review them periodically, right? So without any further ado, let's give a warm welcome to George Bailey. Come on up, George.
So, well, thanks for the nice introduction, Brian. Again, my name's George Bailey. Just show of hands, who works in IT, information technology, or even, okay. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today, and hopefully folks online, there's a mix between IT and business stakeholders, because the way that I present this deck is really not for, this is going to reinforce everything you already know about policies. But it's meant to help those folks you work with understand why policy helps you do your job better. So who am I? I guess I'm a mid-career, just turned 50, mid-career IT guy. I've been in either an IT or a cyber role since the day I left college. I'm a 3-time Purdue graduate, boiler up. I left Purdue, came back to Purdue, father, grandpa, husband, right? So I'm definitely a family man. When I'm not advocating and evangelizing for cybersecurity, I'm usually on a soccer field or a t-ball field doing something with the family. Army brat, moved around a lot, moved to Indiana in the early 90s, haven't left, right? So at least for now, I'm calling Indiana home. CyberTAP, the organization I work for. So I tell people I work at Purdue, but I have operationally nothing to do with Purdue, right? So it's easy for me to get that sales call and someone wants to sell me a new SIM. I'm like, nice, wrong department, right? So what CyberTAP does is we are a state-recognized technical assistance program. So lots of organizations come to Purdue for science and engineering help all the time. Things like, hey, we're doing additive manufacturing. How do we titanium print this widget, right? So TAP will link them up with a PhD caliber metallurgist, and they sort through that problem. Well, when organizations need cyber assistance, that gets dispatched to my team. We've been around since 2009 in a couple of different iterations of name and branding. As presidents roll off and a lot of things happen at the university. So we've been doing business as CyberTAP since 2019. Prior to that, we were heavily focused on healthcare as a vertical, and we were doing business as Purdue Healthcare Advisors. So if you work in healthcare, you've probably heard of PHA, either on the cyber or quality side. That's what we do. Our two main focuses are education, not from a public, come put your credit card on the website, take a cyber class. It's more of a B2B interaction, upskilling and reskilling. So we've recently just closed out a large 6-year cyber apprenticeship program with the Department of Labor, where we were taking folks who either they're trying to transition into cyber, right? They've been in IT, they know cyber, but they're trying to get that title or new position. We'd run them through some education, get some on-job training, that sort of thing. Our second fork is advisory. So we don't do any hard remediation. We don't sell products, right? So, but if you want to come in and get a third-party unbiased opinion on how well your environment is secured, that's kind of what we focus on. We do that for small and medium business. Primarily folks that we can go out and get funding so that they don't have a bill to pay. It's either free or extremely low cost. Things like we've done work for the NSA. We've done work for the Department of Energy. We've done work for a variety of state organizations. And because we have a shared desire to help some of these small guys. So under-resourced, currently working on local governments, SMBs, anybody that's looking for FAR, so Federal Acquisition Rule compliance. We like to see those folks because we have some funding to help them. And of course, critical infrastructure. Think about where you get your electricity. Unless you're here in Marion County, you're probably getting your electricity from a very rural electrical co-op, which may not even have an IT team, let alone someone advocating for cybersecurity. So that's who we are. Look us up if you have any questions. Happy to speak and be part of a support team, however it makes sense for your organization. So today's agenda, cybersecurities. Can they save your organization? What's all the hype? That's not an easy question to answer, but I think, and there's not a cut and dry, black and white, yes, you need policy or no, you need policy, right? Because it depends a lot about your organization, your business. But some of the things I'm going to try to speak to today to convince you that policies are a good thing are defense in depth. Are they required? Yeah, maybe. The value of policies, the common misconceptions of policies. Why don't we have policies, or why don't we do a good job of policies? So let's talk about some of those misconceptions. Implementing policies, which is one of the barriers to why we don't have good policies. Common policy statements, and then hopefully if I don't ramble on for more than 30 minutes, we can have a Q&A. I do seem to talk a lot, so if Brian, if you want to keep time for me and tell me, come on, George, let's move this along. Yeah, thumbs up. Thank you. So defense in depth, right? So there's a few things here. Policies themselves aren't going to protect your organization, right? They're not necessarily detective controls that we would have on the network or on a host or in the cloud, right? They're not going to be that IPS that's going to stop bad actors from doing bad things. But what they do is they start to set leadership expectations. And I like to think that also during times of chaos, right? If you've ever sat on a recovery team dealing with a ransomware attack and you've thought about, okay, who are our regulators that we have to notify as soon as we know that there's been a meaningful or impactful breach? Well, some of that stuff should already have been thought about in your policies. They set expectations for your employees, right? How should they behave with company data, company systems, connections, relationships, our contractors, our vendors, our customers, our regulators, right? So if you have an incident, something bad happens, your regulators are going to expect you have some form of policy in place, right? This is not rocket science. And if you don't have them, you're going to be judged by the quality or lack thereof of your policies. But they do provide a framework and a major component in your defense in depth, right? Because we have organizational policies, we have end-user policies, we might have third-party risk management policies. All of these things, think of that layered onion approach. You peel it off, and as close as you get to the crown jewels, you've got tighter and more restrictive more enforceable policies. Are policies required? This is a big depends. And I know that when we talk cybersecurity, we don't like very subjective language, but it really depends on industry you're in, the type of data that you hold, right? If you hold PII, personally identifiable information, or financial information, or protected health information, anything that you're under a compliance regulation to protect, right? Policies aren't going to make your business more successful, right? It's not going to prevent you from being successful, but they are going to be required from some of those industry regulatory frameworks. Contractual obligations. What about your business relationships and your partners, right? They, to be a part of someone's supply chain, they might want you to have some foundational cyber policies in place. And it means that in order to win that next contract, you might have to quickly jump through some hoops to show that you've got policies in place. Because if they're sharing data, either EDI or some other means of getting you data, they want to make sure that their intellectual property is protected while you have possession of it. Insurance, we've seen this kind of an iterative cycle over the last, 5 to 10 years. Insurance, cyber insurance used to be really easy to get, right? You literally had like a questionnaire of 3 things, right? Did you have antivirus? Do you have firewalls? And they might ask about some other technical control. Maybe it was training. Now it's literally a 12, 15-page questionnaire, and they're expecting that you have policies in place. And if you don't, and you check that no, it's not an immediate you can't be insured, but expected additional inquiry for sure. State laws, whether that's your California Consumer Privacy Act, your General Protection Regulation from GDPR, COPA, Children's Online Privacy Act, now we have version 2 coming out. We've got FTC red flags, right? So if you take credit cards or you do a line of credit, you've got to have cyber policies. If you take credit cards, you got PCI, DSS. And that's not a law, but we would consider that an industry regulation in order to do that business. All of these things, there's so many overlapping requirements that just about every business should have a policy in place. Key aspects. What is the value of a policy? Some of these are my opinion. Some of it's backed by research. Some of it is just conventional wisdom, which may or may not be true, right? So a good policy should lower your risk to data breaches, right? So think about that acceptable use policy that we have all our employees acknowledge. First day on the job, we give them their laptop, we give them their credentials, and we tell them, hey, this is how we want you to behave on the network. This is how we want you to handle our data. If we do that well and employees follow those policies, then in theory, they're not going to be on websites and other actions on a company asset that might endanger the company, right? Demonstrating due diligence. Not only to our regulators, but our customers, right? I've had to be on the incident response side on a number of breaches where SSNs were disclosed. And I wish I had the voice. I carry the voicemail around with me because every now and then I have to re-listen to it. And there was this gentleman who called me up, and you could hear the stress in his voice. And it was, we gave him credit monitoring, and we give him guidance, freeze your credit, monitor your credit, do all the things that we should be doing as consumers anyway. And he was very distraught. And I was fearful that if he knew where my office was, this gentleman was going to show up and pay me a visit. So due diligence. We need to do what our customers and our constituents expect us to do, right? NPD, the recent national public data breach, right, went public in August. Has any of you guys looked up if you're impacted in that breach? Yeah. So 11 records of that 2.9 billion are mine, and most of them are, like the most recent record is 20 years old. But if someone was creating a dossier of me and they sourced that public data, there's a lot more information out there now. And NPD, I'm going to venture to guess, being a small company, they probably had very little policy or no policy at all. Customer investment and confidence, again, if you're a small company and you're looking to attract business from a larger company, they're going to want to make sure that you're not only viable from a business perspective, but you're not a huge risk, right? During mergers and acquisitions, security policies are generally scrutinized before that full acclimation happens, where basically you're going to adopt the policies of the larger organization. But if you're a publicly traded company and you've got to do SEC findings whenever you have a material breach, investors are going to be looking, okay, is cyber a problem for this organization? Not that they're going to have access to your policies, but those more well-connected investors, they'll get a hold of them somehow, right? Consistency and clarity. We want people to do the right thing at the right time and know what to do when something bad happens, right? So policies provide that consistency and clarity of action. Maintaining a competitive edge, right? So if we can reduce our risk, if we can show a clear line of due diligence, and we can remain compliant to some regulatory framework that might involve fines or fees if we are proven to be uncompliant, all that boils down to a competitive advantage, right? The more efficient you can run your business, the cheaper you can run your business, it's going to be a competitive advantage. Because other folks who don't have policy, they might be spinning their wheels doing a lot of firefighting, right, during an incident. That wouldn't be the case if you thought about developing a robust policy ahead of time. Misconceptions. These are things that I see all the time. So when I go around and I do advisory work, the first thing I ask for is, can I read your employee handbook? Can I read your policies, your procedures? And most organizations say, yeah, we'll get them to you, we'll get them to you. And a couple of weeks into the assessment, and I've poked and prodded them a couple of times, they come around and it's like, we don't have anything documented. And I said, well, don't spend your time documenting something for my sake for this assessment, because if you can't show me, I put my auditor hat on, if you can't show me a policy or some sort of strategy document prior to an assessment, I'm not really going to give you credit for it, right? Because if you think how regulatory audits happen, most of those things happen remotely these days, right? If OCR, Office of Civil Rights, calls you up and they want to do a HIPAA audit, they're not going to just randomly show up at your door, right? They're going to send an email to the privacy and security officers, who they should have via policy and job description and all the other structural frameworks in place. They're going to say, hey, fax us your policies and procedures, right? So they're going to go to the fax machine and they're going to fax all this stuff to OCR. Well, they might have operational practices, but if they don't have them documented, the auditor is going to be waiting and waiting. And so these misconceptions I see all the time. Cybersecurity is solely an IT department's responsibility. You guys, you work in IT, you realize that is not factual, right? You're the custodians. You're the handlers. You make sure that the environment is healthy, that the information is accessible, it's flowing, it's protected, but you don't authorize who gets access to what, right? You make that happen once a business stakeholder says, fill out a ServiceNow ticket or whatever the workflow is. We just hired a new business analyst in HR. They need access to ERP, they need access to file share, they need these printers, yada, yada, yada. Great. Put them in the right groups, or however you provision that. If we leave policy purely to the IT department, it's not going to match business process or business culture, right? And we see a lot of shadow IT happening because not that the policies aren't protective when IT does them in a silo, but what it means is that we're going to produce procedures and process that a business person either is not comfortable adhering to, or in their mind it's not fast enough, it's cumbersome, I can't, it's not innovative enough, and they're going to go around that and implement new technology that's going to be against policy, but it might also weaken the security that IT's put in place. So definitely when you think about retooling your policy structure, IT needs to be at the table, but we need senior leadership, we need business leaders, we need folks that understand the value of the data outside of the bits and the bytes. More cybersecurity tools mean better protection, right? So CFOs, I don't know if there's a CFO online, I apologize. A lot of IT report up their CFO. Just because you're spending more on cybersecurity tools doesn't necessarily mean that you're protected, right? Because if you don't have policy that speaks to how technology should be implemented and managed, it's likely that we buy a new whiz-bang EDR tool and we only implement 80% of it. Because the business culture doesn't allow for automatic quarantining or some other technical control that really why we want that EDR, but we can't implement it because there's not policy that allows IT to take extra steps that we want them to do. So buying more tools doesn't mean you're protected, right? It certainly helps, but you got to have that structure, that guiding framework, those guardrails that a policy help you. Compliancy equals security, right? You guys know this. You can be HIPAA compliant, right? HIPAA compliancy, that mandate was ratified in '96. Congress couldn't make the rules, so Health and Human Services created security rules in the early 2000s. Well, we're closing on 25 years, right? There hasn't been a material update to HIPAA since the omnibus rules in 2014, and all that said is we had to now tell people when we got breached. Wow, that was the major update. So just because you are compliant to HIPAA doesn't necessarily mean you're secure, because you are adhering to a standard that should truly be the basement, and folks are aspiring for to be the ceiling. So make sure that when you develop your policies, that not only are you thinking about, okay, this is what legally we have to do, but progressively, what should we be doing to push the dial forward to educate and secure the environment? Cyber policies are set and forget it. Yeah, I know the IT guys in this room that are sitting on those compliance committees and risk management committees. They probably wish it was set and forget it, because re-communicating the need for updates is hard, and getting buy-in across the organization is hard. But frankly, technology moves way too fast. So if we are creating policies and we review them every decade, they're not going to live up to the threats. Okay, so think about quantum, right? NIST just released some quantum safe encryption protocols, right? So if you have data transactions that need to live a very, 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 very long time, and that encryption is important to you, right? Using something like a policy that says, a minimum encryption algorithm of DES, well, that's not going to, well, that wouldn't cut it even before quantum computing, but, right, just something to consider out. I walk in environments all the time that, I see their Wi-Fi policy, and it says that, you either have to connect to a VPN to get to the guest Wi-Fi, or you have to have web encryption. Okay, maybe I can get on board with a VPN connection, but web should not be anywhere in anybody's policies these days. Cloud provider fully covers your cybersecurity needs. There's a shared metrics there, right? So, a cloud provider is going to do a lot for you, but they're going to secure the infrastructure, the control planes, the management planes of the cloud. They're not going to protect your servers, and they're certainly not going to protect access to your data, right? Cybersecurity training is a one-time event. We train, most organizations try to do some form of training. Usually it's that same day they get hired during orientation. People are worried about their benefits, right? They're going to sign anything to make sure that their kids get health insurance. That 1 hour, no before PowerPoint or CBT that we walk them through, that's not going to move the dial. Implementing policies. Why are they such a problem, right? Resource limitations. If you work for a small organization, you might be the IT director that has to do everything, right? And just keeping the lights on is difficult enough. Evolving threat landscape. Again, the adversaries are changing their TTPs, their techniques, their tools, their procedures, their tactics much faster than policy can ever adopt. So just know that it's always going to be a dog chasing its tail when we're trying to defend against the adversaries. But if we review and manage our policy structure well, hopefully we're keeping pace with them. Compliance regulation changes. Certainly not in the case of HIPAA, but GDPR is changing, state laws, privacy laws are changing, and we have 50 of them now, and now they're all being revised and modernized. So new regulations happen all the time, and if you don't have someone who is monitoring that ecosystem, you likely have a gap in some of your strategy documents. Human factors. You can tell employees, here's your policy, you sign it on your first day, you've acknowledged we have this policy, but humans will be humans. Employees want to do a good job, they're well-intended. There are cases of insider threat and bad actors and malicious actors, but for the most part, every one of your employees wants to do a good job, but they may not understand the policy, right? They're not technologists, they may not quite understand how do I send in a secure email through Outlook, right? That's the policy, but no one's ever taught me how to do it. So human factors makes implementing policy hard. Technical integration, all right, you might have policy that is somewhat antiquated because you're retooling. You've been on-prem, Active Directory, now you're going to Entra ID and Azure, and you got to figure out how you map all of your on-prem Active Directory management processes to the cloud environment. Right? Some of them are the same, some of them are different. Right? You got a lot more capability when you move things to the cloud. Continuous monitoring improvement is one of the biggest things I see in policy management. Just knowing when a policy is no longer good, and that's where reviewing them on somewhat of a regular cadence, whether that's annually, every 18 months. I wouldn't do it any less frequent than 24 months. Right, because a lot of compliancy frameworks will start to discredit some of your policy, your strategy practices if it's too old. Usual policy, so which one should we have? Now this doesn't mean that you would have to have explicit policy, but you should try to cover these topics in some organizational policy. And some of these organizational policies might be in user, but mainly they are management policies on how IT, business stakeholders implement processes. Privacy policy, right? So this is how we're going to keep customers, constituents, vendors, data safe and secure, private, right? So within the organization, who has business need to know, authorization to view private, sensitive data, that kind of thing. Data protection policy, how do we decide to protect data? Do we use encryption? Do we tokenization? Do we mask it? Do we have data retention policies that say, hey, once the data hits a certain age, we're going to purge it because it's a liability to us to hold it if we're not using it to improve business. I was involved in the T-Mobile breach earlier this year. Haven't been a T-Mobile customer in 25 years. You can imagine I was rather upset. You follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen the tweets. I feel bad about it now, but I didn't then. Access control policy. How do we give access to people? Who's the authorization process, right? Again, IT is going to be the custodian. They're going to make that access happen. But let's not make IT the policeman. Employee training awareness policy, how often we do it. Risk assessment policy. So how do we manage risk across the organization? These are things that we should think about prior to having to have one. Third-party risk management, monitoring, detection, audit compliance, incident response plan. In a priority, this probably should be first, right? We set up organizations to try to be preventive of bad things that are happening, but we need to be more in a detection mode. Right? I don't know that I necessarily subscribe to the theory that it's not a matter of if you'll be compromised, it's a matter of when. I mean, I truly do think that organizations can defend themselves, but if something bad happens, we need to be able to detect it quickly, right? That dwell time of 200 days or whatever it is from the time an adversary gets in to the time that it gets detected, ideally we would get that down to almost nothing. So incident response plan would probably be my top priority if I were to number these things. What should our end users have? Data classification policy, right? They're creating data. They know what's important to the business. IT can password protect it, we can encrypt it, we can back it up, we can lock it away, but right, we don't know the true value, right? We have to be told that, and sometimes our end users need to be told how sensitive certain data is. Acceptable use policy, you spoke to that already. Password management policy, or maybe lack thereof, right? So we should be thinking more than just password policy, but Again, some of these are foundational that compliance frameworks are going to expect that you have. Information sharing policy, it used to be called email and communication policy, right? How do we share data with folks inside the organization and folks outside the organization? Can I just attach this Excel spreadsheet with the next quarterly revenue projections on an email out to, a listserv somewhere? Maybe, but some of the breaches that I've had to deal with were human error. They've attached a spreadsheet full of PII, including SSN and bank routing numbers, and it went to, they fat fingered the email address, and it went to a listserv to hundreds of people outside the organization. Trying to get affidavit for hundreds of people saying they deleted the attachment is very hard to do. So just get in front of that problem with a policy. Incident reporting policy. If you have an incident response policy that says, hey, we're gonna respond and investigate to every incident that we believe is happening, how do we feed that process, right? So employees need to know that if they see something, say something, and this should not be punitive, right? If I fall victim to a phishing message, I should feel comfortable to self-report so that, right, the IT team can do what they need to do to protect me and the rest of the organization. Mobile device, bring your own why, right? Question mark, bring your own vulnerability. With COVID and digital transformation, it's quite acceptable for people to use whatever technology to get their job done. Well, we might need to set guardrails around that. Policy structure. These are things that you'll typically see in a policy, right? We need a purpose statement. Why do we have this policy? The actual policy, so thou shalt type of statement. Scope of the policy. Who does this affect? Is this just on guests? Is it just on vendors? Is it just on contractors? Could be everybody. Roles and responsibilities, so who's going to ensure that this policy is maintained and accountable. Review and update cadence. Leadership and acknowledgement approval, right? This is very important. If you have policy, but your leadership is not acknowledging the policy, they're exempt from the policy, they don't have to follow it, it's going to be very hard to enforce it if you had to. So to wrap up in the next couple of minutes, right, why can't policies save your organization in and of their own, right? They're hard to do, right? They're a moving target in a threat landscape that's always changing, but they are important. Hopefully I've convinced you if you didn't already were convinced. Policies can significantly improve your cyber posture. They are expected by various stakeholders. Policies are, should be a careful consideration of your business practice, the data that you hold, how you share it, how you use it. It's not a Mad Lib exercise, right? So there's tons of great policy templates on the internet. Heck, you can use AI. Generative AI now will make policy, that initial development, a piece of cake. But you have to own it. You have to make it your own, right? Policies need to be socialized, they need to be managed, and they need to be enforced. Otherwise, it's just something in your employee handbook that they read once, and it's sitting on a shelf collecting dust. So with that, I think we're about out of time, Brian? All right. So,
George, I have a question.
Okay.
So let's say that you convinced me, all right, I got to get a cybersecurity policy in place. Where does a company begin to start this process? How do they do that?
Good question. So if the company doesn't have cybersecurity leadership, so they don't have a CISO or director of security or manager of information assurance, right? They should go out and seek a partner, right? Whether that's someone, it could be someone in their industry, right? So if they're in healthcare, they could reach out to a number of professional associations, and they can guide them on how to at least address their legal requirements. If they do have a cyber advocate internally, then they need to start to build a group of folks, right? Both IT against that cybersecurity advocate and business leaders, so they can start to inventory, right? Where are our risks? Have we had a risk assessment? Because hopefully policy, I had a lot of policies up here, and most of these policies, if you did a thorough risk assessment, you would learn that your risk assessment is going to point to what policies you need. So have someone come do a risk assessment, whether that's Flat Earth, whether that's a Sterling Group, right? There's lots of places where you can get some help to just come in and have them poke around and give you some ideas of where your risks are. So professional associations, either an internal resource if you can hire it, or beg, steal, or borrow it, or go out and find a partner. Yep. Good question.
Okay.
Yep.
Follow-up question.
Go ahead.
All right, so let's say you have a cybersecurity policy in place. How frequently should you review it and revise it?
So I'm not an attorney, but I do work with one, and she would tell you probably annually. As a practitioner and knowing how certain technology components don't quite change that, so definitely every 2 years, right? No longer than 24 months. Because you might have, a lot of your policies, you're going to review it. Yes, this is still good. Nothing's changed materially in the organization. And then you're going to have other policies like, you might have an antivirus policy that really guides how IT procures it, manages it. But then it's going to speak to, well, we got to do signature updates every day. Well, if you've got a modern EDR, right, there is no concept of signature updates anymore. So is it a big deal that it's in your policy? No, but we kind of want those things to be directionally accurate of what we're doing. So if you do it on an annual basis, you might catch things like that and just strike it out.
Dave?
The auditors usually like annual.
They do, right? Because there's a lot of different checkpoints that we should be doing on an annual basis, right? So risk assessment is one of those things that should be almost continuously, right? Because you might do an organizational risk assessment every couple of years for compliancy purposes, but we onboard services, new hosts, new connections all the time, right? So if you wait 2 years to do an enterprise risk assessment, and in that 2 years you've gone from on-prem to cloud, and no one's assessed the risk to those activities, that's a big window of opportunity to miss, and a big opportunity for an adversary to do things that you're just not necessarily governing. So. Good question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we have a lot of documents we have to write in our field. Now we have artificial intelligence, machine learning. Where do you stick your AI policy? Is that under acceptable use? I mean, if you look at 90% of the AI tools out there, they're a risk, especially for data leakage.
They are. So I see utilization of AI in a couple of different policies, right? Certainly in acceptable use, because you might be in an industry where using an AI that is something that's not confined in that you control, right? So ChatGPT or Copilot or Plexus or one of the other public generative AI. If I was a go-getting nurse and I wanted to upload my patient's chart to, give me what's the likelihood of this patient having renal failure, right? Or some clinical question, right? It's out there. Now we just trained this new public AI on our data. So I think it definitely needs acceptable use, right? Whether or not, yes, we can use it, be smart about it, right? But then you might also talk about it in your data protection, right? There's certain classes of data that you cannot use in public generative AI.
Well, see, now you're getting into issues like image and voice. I have 15 minutes of you talking, I can deepfake you.
Exactly.
Okay, I have 15 minutes of video, I can deepfake you. Now we have people who, Microsoft is always great at introducing threats to your environment. They have their Microsoft store. They put a tool out there called Read AI, which now insinuates itself into every Teams meeting.
Yep. It'll read your email for you. And
yeah, you have executive leadership meetings that are recorded by this. Well, where's that recording kept? How's that fenced? Who else has access to that? There's no review of that. And, actually, I'm writing an AI use policy and says, don't.
Yeah,
Without review.
And that's where you might, as an organization, if your leadership in the business side says, you know what, we like the potential of AI, get us something that is safe and you're comfortable with, and then it might be that you teach your own models, right? You build your own LLM and you train on organizational data, and
that's where we're at. We're doing it and using Copilot as the head, and you can fence it. But again, just like people giving away their credentials, my favorite memory of Purdue.
Yeah, AI is a touchy topic.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's just another risk out there.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yes, Greg.
I've got a question from online. What would be the first 3 policies you would implement?
First three that I would implement, I would certainly implement an end-user acceptable use policy, right? Because if someone is doing something not necessarily nefarious or malicious, but they're doing something on their laptop that is risky, we want to make sure that they understand what is allowed and what isn't. Because if they cause an incident and you wanted to make an example out of them, but we've never told them what they can and can't do, that could cause problems. So definitely acceptable use. I would definitely have a incident response plan, right? And I think that, man, you know, I really like security charters. I don't even have it up here. Security charters or security governance, right? So this is really a statement from the leadership on what is our intent to protect company assets, customer data, and it might speak to a lot of these different things, not in depth, but just speak to how we're going to protect the environment, right? So it kind of sets the tone for a lot of these things. So I don't know if I would go with that first, but definitely acceptable use policy, incident response plan, and either data protection policy, because if we're going to protect data, it means that we're restricting access or we're authorizing access. So some of these other things are going to have to be addressed, at least operationally. And I don't know if it's a policy per se, but I would definitely spend some time thinking about how you train your workforce. Because it's not a once and done. What I see that seems to work well is that you pick a couple of themes and you just reiterate over and over, right? A lot of security programs will try to educate on the latest and greatest threats, which may be very, very little risk to your organization, and we're just causing noise to the employee, right? What do they really need to know? They need to know password practices, MFA, they need data protection, phishing, social engineering threats, those types of things. They don't need to know that, you know, that the latest CPU meltdown vulnerability is something they need to be concerned about. All right. Oh, good question. I don't know if I've addressed it fully, but go this way.
Thank you so much, George. Thank you very much. Yeah. All right, as we wrap up here today, I just want to reiterate our sincere thanks for you taking your time to be with us today. Hopefully you got some ideas and some action items that you can use to improve your practice and, you know, your cybersecurity program. Certainly from our perspective, we're, you know, very interested in continual learning, growing together. So our door is always open. If you ever have questions or if we can be of service in any way, please don't hesitate to ask. Happy to help in any way that we can. I know that the lunch here was great. Hope for those online you have a great lunch today too. And you guys enjoy your afternoon. Thanks again for coming.